It exploded out of nowhere. 1 second, I was enjoying a rare moment of quiet sunshine on the sidewalk with Patches, my miniature service horse. The next, a furry white missile launched itself from across the street, zeroed in on Patches' legs like a heat-seeking piranha. Chaos. Pure, unadulterated, yapping chaos. Killer, yes. Karen across the street, genuinely named her fluffy little ankle-biter Killer, was a snarling, snapping vortex of terrier fury. Patches, bless his sturdy, four-legged soul, stood his ground, but I could feel the nervous tension vibrating through the lead rope. His ears flickered, his body shifted, the bright blue service animal vest he wore seeming like a target rather than a warning. And Karen? Oh, Karen was performing her usual role in any crisis, flapping uselessly. She stood on the edge of her perfect lawn, the leash dangling limply from her hand like a forgotten accessory, screeching, "Killer! Killer, stop that! Naughty boy! Mommy says no, no!" Her voice was a high-pitched whine that did nothing but add fuel to Killer's already blazing fire. My own training kicked in before conscious thought. Years spent on training fields with powerful German shepherds and intense Belgian Malinois. Dogs whose controlled aggression was a tool, not a random neighborhood hazard. You don't meet uncontrolled aggression with panic or yelling. You meet it with calm, decisive control. I moved instantly, putting my body between Killer and Patch's front legs. I didn't shout Karen's name or Killer's ridiculous moniker. I dropped my center of gravity slightly, focused my entire attention on the snarling furball, and barked out a command, sharp and clear, cutting through Karen's ineffective screeching. "AUS Platz!" It wasn't English. It was German, the command language used in Schutzhund and most police K9 training. Out, leave it, down. The words themselves probably meant nothing to Killer, but the tone, the intensity, the absolute, unwavering authority packed into those two syllables, that was universal in the canine world. It was the alpha command structure, the voice that expects and receives immediate compliance. Killer froze mid-snarl. His tiny body went rigid, startled by the unexpected force emanating from this human who wasn't flapping or screeching. He blinked, his pointy ears swiveling, confusion warring with his ingrained aggression. Karen stopped her whining, momentarily baffled into silence. Patches let out a soft whinny, pressing his solid little body against my leg for reassurance. A silent, "What the heck was that, boss?" "Get your dog under control," I said, my voice low and steady, keeping my eyes locked on Killer. "Now!" Karen snapped back to reality, or at least her version of it. Indignation flooded her face, erasing the brief moment of confusion. "How dare you speak to Killer like that? He was just playing. Your animal." She waved a dismissive hand towards Patches. "It startled him. It shouldn't even be out here on the sidewalk." Playing? That needle-toothed menace was about 2 seconds away from trying to rip out Patches' tendons. Patches, the calm, steady presence who allows me to navigate the world despite a tricky balance disorder that came courtesy of a neurological condition. Patches, who has more training, patience, and common sense packed into his 34-inch frame than Karen possessed in her entire, meticulously curated existence. And he was the problem? Right. Deep breaths, Jack. Use the training. Don't engage the handler until the immediate threat is contained. I ignored Karen, kept my focus laser-sharp on Killer, and repeated the command, slightly lower, slightly more guttural. "Platz!" To my mild surprise, and likely Karen's utter astonishment, the little terrier actually obeyed. Sort of. He tucked his tail, whined softly, and sank onto his belly, ears flattened, looking nervously between me and Karen, as if trying to figure out who was actually in charge. It was the canine equivalent of throwing his paws up in surrender. Okay, threat neutralized. Now for the handler. I quickly clipped the spare lead I always carry onto Patches' halter, running a soothing hand down his neck, checking his legs quickly. Thankfully, just a few damp spots from Killer's spittle, maybe a superficial scrape hidden by fur, but no blood. Patches leaned into my touch, his breathing evening out. Across the small patch of grass separating us, Karen finally remembered the leash in her hand and snapped it onto Killer's collar, hauling the confused, now submissive terrier away from the scene of his failed crime. "What did you just do to my dog?" Karen demanded, her voice regaining its usual shrill edge now that Killer wasn't actively trying to maim anything. "What language was that? Are you some kind of dog whisperer?" I straightened up, meeting her glare. Patches stood calmly beside me, a picture of equine dignity despite the recent assault. "It's called control, Karen. Something you clearly lack with your animal. He just attacked my service animal." "Service animal?" She scoffed, looking Patches up and down with open disdain. "That's a pony. Ponies aren't service animals, they're livestock. Section 8, subsection C of the HOA bylaws clearly prohibits the harboring of livestock within residential zones." She practically vibrated with the righteousness of citing a rule. Any rule. "He's a miniature horse, Karen," I corrected her, keeping my voice even. "Specifically trained and legally recognized under the Americans with Disabilities Act as a service animal to mitigate my disability. He has more right to be on this sidewalk than your aggressive, uncontrolled pet." Karen puffed up like an angry pigeon, clutching Killer's leash so tightly her knuckles went white. The poor dog looked like he was being garroted. "Adia, don't be ridiculous. This is Sunny Meadows Estates. I am the HOA president, and I know the rules. That thing," she gestured towards Patches again, her lip curling, "is a violation. I saw it trampling the common area grass near the entrance yesterday." "He was walking on the sidewalk, Karen, just like we are now," I countered, feeling my own patience start to fray. "And your dog was off-leash before it attacked. That's a violation anyone can understand. Leash laws. Look it up sometime." I became aware of an audience. 2 houses down, Mr. Henderson, a kindly old man whose azaleas were his pride and joy, had paused his watering and was peering over his perfectly trimmed hedge, his expression one of mild bewilderment. And leaning on their shovels near my backyard gate were Leo and Rick, the contractors I'd hired to reinforce Patches' fence and build him a proper, secure turnout area. They were watching the unfolding suburban drama with the quiet, professional interest of anthropologists observing a bizarre tribal ritual. This was classic Karen. The standard operating procedure. Deny the obvious. Killer was not playing. Deflect blame. It was Patch's fault for existing. Double down by quoting irrelevant bylaws. Livestock, grass trampling. She didn't give a damn that her dog had just committed assault by proxy. Her entire worldview was threatened by the presence of a well-behaved miniature horse that didn't fit neatly into her narrow definition of acceptable. The grass trampling accusation was particularly rich. Patches weighed maybe 250 pounds, soaking wet, and moved with careful deliberation. Karen's gas-guzzling SUV probably left deeper impressions on the asphalt just idling in her driveway. "This is completely unacceptable," Karen declared, her voice rising again, clearly building up to her favorite part, wielding her imaginary power. "I'm writing you up. This is a formal warning. There will be fines. I might even have to initiate removal procedures for the creature." Okay, deep breath, de-escalate, explain calmly, use simple words. "Karen," I started, trying one last time for reason. "Let me explain this very simply. 1. Your dog, off-leash, attacked my service animal. That is a serious incident, legally speaking. 2. Patches, as a recognized service animal under federal law, is legally permitted access anywhere I am permitted access. 3. The commands I used on your dog? They worked because controlling animal behavior is literally what I do for a living. Karen scoffed again, tossing her head. What, you train ponies now? Is that a job? No, I said, letting the information drop as casually as I could manage. I train police K9 units, German Shepherds, Belgian Malinois, dogs that work patrol, detection, apprehension, dogs that could chew Killer up like a squeaky toy before breakfast and still have room for kibble. I paused, letting that sink in. I know dog behavior, Karen, intimately, and your dog is poorly trained, poorly socialized, and aggressive. The fact that he responded, even briefly, to a basic dominance command tells me he's not inherently vicious, just badly managed. He's confused because he has no clear leadership. The effect was immediate. Karen's jaw literally dropped. Her eyes widened slightly. The information, Police K9 trainer, hung in the air between us, thick and unexpected. This wasn't just some eccentric neighbor with a tiny horse anymore. This was someone who dealt with real dogs, the kind that ride in police cars and bite bad guys, not the kind that wear rhinestone collars and ride in designer handbags. Across the lawn, I saw Leo nudge Rick. A small smirk flickered across Rick's face before vanishing. Mr. Henderson adjusted his glasses, leaning forward slightly. Karen's outrage momentarily short-circuited. A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face, quickly masked by a renewed wave of indignation, but the target of her ire seemed to shift slightly. Police dogs? Well, that hardly gives you the right to yell foreign commands at poor Killer, or to violate HOA rules by keeping livestock. The rules are the rules, no matter what you do. She clung to the bylaws like a life raft. I sighed internally. Reasoning was officially futile. Time to escalate to the next level of bureaucracy, the one with actual enforcement power. Okay, Karen, you want to do this by the book? Fine, let's use the real book. I pulled out my phone. I'm calling the police department right now to report the dog attack by your off-leash animal. And after that, I'll be drafting a formal complaint to the entire HOA board. Not just you detailing your negligence as a dog owner, your harassment of a resident with a disability, and your interference with a service animal. We'll see which rules hold up. Her eyes widened again, this time with a touch of panic. The police? The rest of the board? This was outside her carefully controlled sphere of influence. Checkmate? Probably not. Dealing with Karens is like playing chess with a pigeon. It ignores the rules, knocks over the pieces, poops on the board, and then struts around like it won anyway. But involving the actual authorities, the ones whose regulations weren't based on subjective interpretations of beige color palettes and lawn gnome placement, that sometimes gets their attention. At least it moves the game to a different board. I dialed the non-emergency number, turning slightly away from Karen, keeping Patches close. Yes, hello, I said calmly into the phone. I need to report an incident involving an aggressive, off-leash dog attacking a service animal. Yes, the service animal is a miniature horse. That's correct. Recognized under ADA guidelines. The owner of the attacking dog is present, but is disputing the facts. My name is Jack Riley. I'm at 124 Willow Lane. Yes, I'm a professional K9 trainer. I work with the County Sheriff's Department K9 unit. Beside me, Karen started sputtering again. He's lying! Killer was just playing. That pony is livestock. Tell them, officer. It's against the rules. Leo and Rick had made a great show of going back to work on the fence, but their hammering seemed suspiciously timed to the pauses in my phone call. They weren't missing a word. Patches just stood patiently, occasionally flicking an ear, the picture of calm in the midst of the suburban storm. Within minutes, a familiar black and white cruiser pulled up to the curb. out stepped Officer Davis, a man whose weary expression suggested he'd seen every possible permutation of neighborhood absurdity. And Officer Chen, younger, sharper, but with a similar air of dispatch. "What have you gotten me into now?" Officer Davis surveyed the scene. Me standing calmly with Patches, Karen practically vibrating with indignation while strangling her small dog via its leash, two contractors pretending intense interest in fence posts, and Mr. Henderson still observing from his azalea-guarded post. "Okay, folks," Officer Davis began, his voice carefully neutral. "What seems to be the problem here? Dispatch mentioned a dog attack involving a horse?" He looked from Killer to Patches, then back again, his eyebrows doing a slow climb towards his hairline. Before I could respond, Karen launched her preemptive strike. "Officer, thank goodness you're here. This man," she pointed dramatically at me, "is violating numerous HOA regulations by keeping livestock on his property. His pony provoked my poor Killer, who was just minding his own business on my lawn. And then this man yelled at my dog in some aggressive foreign language." I waited for her to pause, taking a breath. "Officers," I said calmly, meeting their gaze. "My name is Jack Riley. This is Patches, my trained service animal. A miniature horse recognized by the ADA for mobility and balance support due to a disability." I gestured to Patches' clearly marked vest. "Her dog," I nodded towards Killer, who was now attempting to become one with Karen's ankles, "was running loose, off-leash, and attacked Patches unprovoked on the public sidewalk. I used a standard K9 de-escalation command, Ausplatz, meaning out down, to stop the attack before my service animal was seriously injured. I would like to file a report regarding the off-leash dog and the attack." Watching the officers process this information was interesting. Officer Davis blinked slowly, his gaze flicking between me, Patches, and Karen. Officer Chen tilted his head slightly, a flicker of, "Is this guy for real?" crossing his face before settling back into professional neutrality. The phrase, "service pony," seemed to be causing a minor short circuit in their standard operating procedures. "Service animal, you said?" Officer Davis confirmed, his eyes lingering on Patches' vest, which clearly read, "Service animal, do not distract." "Miniature horse?" "Correct, officer," I affirmed. "They're less common than service dogs, but fully recognized under the ADA for individuals like myself who may have allergies or require sturdier support than a dog can provide." Officer Chen pulled out his notepad. "And you mentioned you're a K9 trainer?" "Yes, officer," I replied. "I work primarily with the county sheriff's department and 2 municipal departments in the Tri-County area, mostly patrol and narcotics detection training." I reached into my wallet and pulled out my professional credentials, my trainer certifications, and department affiliation ID, holding them out unobtrusively. The shift in their demeanor was subtle but definite. They dealt with dog trainers, especially police trainers, all the time. It wasn't just random guy with a tiny horse anymore. It was professional colleague in the animal behavior field with a tiny horse. It added a layer of credibility that Karen's screeching lacked. Officer Davis turned his attention back to Karen. "Ma'am, was your dog off-leash when this incident occurred?" Karen sputtered, her face flushing. "Well, he just slipped out, just for a second. He saw the pony and got excited. It startled him." "Did your dog make physical contact with the horse, ma'am?" Officer Davis pressed, his voice patient but firm. "He might have barked a little close," Karen conceded grudgingly. "He was snapping and lunging at his legs, officer," I clarified calmly. "No serious injury that I can see yet, thankfully, but the intent was clearly aggressive, not playful." Officer Chen, meanwhile, had ambled over to Mr. Henderson's fence line. "Sir," he called over politely, "you have a clear view here. Did you happen to see what occurred?" Mr. Henderson adjusted his hearing aid and nodded slowly. "Oh yes, officer. Clear as day. Little white dog, Killer they call him, shot out of Karen's yard like a streak of lightning. Made a beeline straight for the little horse there, barking and carrying on something fierce. Then this young man here," he gestured towards me, "yelled something loud, foreign-sounding, like on those war movies, and the little dog just stopped dead in its tracks, flattened right out on the grass. Scared the dickens out of it, I think." Officer Davis glanced towards the contractors. Leo, ever helpful, offered his perspective without being asked. "Saw the little dog running loose, yeah, barking its head off at the pony. Heard the command Jack gave. Loud and clear. Never seen Killer shut up that fast before. Usually takes Karen 5 minutes of yelling." Rick nodded in agreement beside him. Faced with my credentials, multiple corroborating witnesses, and the undeniable fact that her dog was off-leash, Karen's bluster began to deflate. Her arguments dwindled back to the only ground she felt safe on. "It's still livestock," she muttered, her voice lacking its earlier conviction. "Section 8, HOA rules. It doesn't belong here." Officer Davis let out a long, weary sigh. Clearly, this wasn't his first rodeo with HOA disputes, though the pony element was likely a new twist. "Okay, here's how this is going to work," he said, addressing Karen directly. "Ma'am, regardless of any HOA rules about livestock, your dog needs to be leashed and under your direct control at all times when off your property. That's state law and local ordinance. Period." He paused, letting that sink in. "We are documenting this incident. Given that the service animal does not appear to be seriously injured, we will issue a formal warning regarding the leash law violation and the aggressive behavior. Consider this your one warning. Another incident involving your dog being off-leash or acting aggressively, especially towards a service animal, and we'll be issuing citations and will likely have to involve animal control." He then turned to me. "Sir, we'll need your full statement for the report. Your name again was Jack Riley?" "That's correct, officer," I said, relief washing over me. "Score 1 for Team Pony." It wasn't exactly justice, but it was official documentation and a clear warning to Karen. The K9 trainer card and the witnesses had definitely helped steer the narrative away from Karen's pony provocation fantasy. But I knew Karen. This wasn't over. This was just round 1. She'd lost the battle of the sidewalk skirmish, but the war of the HOA bylaws? That was her home turf. She'd be back. Probably with laminated reinforcements. The next day, the rhythmic clang of hammers echoed from my backyard. Leo and Rick were back at it, efficiently installing the final sections of the heavy-duty 6-foot fence that would give Patches a safe, secure area to stretch his legs without risking encounters with Killer or incurring Karen's wrath about common area grazing. Patches himself was chilling in his temporary pen nearby, munching contentedly on a flake of alfalfa hay, seemingly unfazed by yesterday's drama. Animals are good at living in the moment. It's the humans who hold the grudges. "So, K9 commands on the neighborhood menace," Rick commented, pausing to wipe sweat from his brow as he secured a gate latch. He was a man of few words, but his dry observations usually hit the mark. "Gotta admit, Jack, that was pretty smooth. Never seen Karen speechless before." Leo chuckled, leaning on his post-hole digger. "Yeah, she looked like she'd seen a ghost yelling in German. Killer looked like he was about ready to apply for witness protection." I managed a small smile. "Standard procedure when dealing with uncontrolled aggression. Works on dogs, occasionally confuses HOA presidents." I gave Patches a scratch behind the ears. "The real question is, what's her next move?" Rick grunted. "Think she'll actually back off after getting chewed out by the cops?" I sighed, watching a squirrel run along the top of the existing fence line. "With Karen? Not a chance. Losing face like that in front of witnesses? She'll double down. She's probably in her command center right now, drafting 17 new bylaws about miniature horse hoof fall decibel levels or the unauthorized shedding of equine hair onto adjacent properties. As if summoned by my prediction of peak pettiness, Karen materialized at the property line, peering through a gap in the hedge separating our yards. She wasn't holding a clipboard this time. She was holding a camera. A fancy one, with a lens long enough to photograph wildlife on the Serengeti. She raised it and started snapping pictures. Not of us, initially, but of the construction site. Click. A shot of the fence posts. Click. A shot of Patches peacefully eating hay. Click. A shot of a half-empty bag of concrete mix leaning against the fence. Leo spotted her first. "Oh," he muttered, nodding towards the hedge. "Incoming. Looks like she's upgraded her surveillance equipment." I turned, forcing a pleasant expression. "Morning, Karen. Enjoying the view, or just documenting potential violations for your scrapbook?" She ignored my greeting, zooming in on the concrete bag. "Contractor debris," she announced to the air, loud enough for us to hear. "Improper storage of construction materials. Potential environmental hazard." Click, click. Rick rolled his eyes. "Lady, it's a bag of concrete mix. We're literally about to mix it with water and pour it for the gatepost footing in like 5 minutes." Karen swung the camera towards Rick, snapping his picture. "Unprofessional conduct," she declared. "Addressing the HOA president in a disrespectful manner. That's a violation of community decorum standards." Click. I had to hand it to her. Her ability to invent violations on the fly was almost impressive. Her strategy was painfully clear. If you can't win on the facts, dog attack, service animal laws, then launch a war of attrition using the HOA rulebook as your weapon. Drown your opponent in a sea of petty procedural paper cuts. Photos of concrete bags, I thought, shaking my head. This woman desperately needs a hobby. Maybe competitive scrapbooking, or extreme couponing. Anything that doesn't involve terrorizing her neighbors with laminated rules. Later that afternoon, after Leo and Rick had finished for the day, leaving behind a beautifully sturdy, patches-proof fence, I found the inevitable results of Karen's photographic expedition stuck to my front door. Not just one official-looking envelope, but 3. Each bearing the Sunny Meadows Estates HOA logo and Karen's spiky, indignant signature as president. Violation. Notice hash. 1. Improper storage of construction materials during active project. Fine. $50 per day until rectified. Apparently, the 5 minutes it took Leo and Rick to mix the concrete constituted improper storage. Violation notice. Hash 2. Unauthorized fence modification specification deviation. Fine. $100 plus demand for immediate cessation of enjoyment of said fence pending architectural review of the as-built condition versus the approved plan, which she had initially rejected, then vaguely approved under duress. She was clearly fishing for any tiny discrepancy. Violation notice. Hash 3. Maintaining a nuisance animal, equine. Fine. $75 per day, citing alleged offensive odors and disruptive noise. This was my favorite. Patches occasionally whinnied softly, usually a greeting when I came out, and smelled faintly of clean hay and horse, a scent I found rather pleasant. Meanwhile, Killer's high-pitched yapping could probably shatter glass, and the landmines he left on the common area strip definitely qualified as an offensive odor. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. Odor complaints? Seriously? I muttered to myself, reading the notices in my kitchen. Her dog treats the neighborhood like his personal toilet, and she's complaining about the smell of hay? I started to crumple the notices in frustration, but stopped myself, carefully smoothing them out. Evidence. Document everything. That's rule number 1. when dealing with bureaucratic bullies. I spent the next hour trying to reach other members of the HOA board, hoping to find a voice of reason, someone who wasn't completely under Karen's thumb. 2 went straight to voicemail. The third, a woman named Barb, who served as treasurer, sounded sympathetic but ultimately unhelpful. "Oh dear, Jack," Barb sighed over the phone. "Karen can be, well, quite insistent when she feels the rules are being broken. She controls the meeting agendas, you see, and the violation notices. It's hard to argue once she's issued them." There was a pause. "But a service horse. My goodness, that's fascinating. Does it wear little shoes, like on the Clydesdales?" I thanked Barb for her time and hung up, feeling a familiar wave of frustration. It was like trying to appeal a parking ticket to the meter maid who wrote it. Time for a different approach, fighting Karen on her home turf. The convoluted and often contradictory HOA bylaws was a losing game. I needed to shift the battlefield to ground where I had the advantage. Actual enforceable laws. Federal ones. The ones with real teeth, not just laminated ones. The next morning, I timed Patch's morning walk deliberately. He needed his constitutional, and I needed to deliver a message. As we ambled down the sidewalk, Patches calm and steady in his vest, me meticulously prepared with a small Ziploc bag for cleanup duty. Karen emerged from her house, pretending to retrieve her mail, but clearly lying in wait. Her eyes narrowed as we approached. "Taking the livestock for a stroll again, I see," she commented, her voice dripping with disapproval. "Did you receive the violation notices I delivered yesterday?" "Morning, Karen," I replied, keeping my tone pleasant but firm. "Yes, I received your creative interpretations of the bylaws. Very imaginative." I stopped in front of her mailbox. "Speaking of rules and regulations, I thought you might find these informative." I pulled a small stack of folded papers from my pocket. "This first one," I said, holding out a printout, "is directly from the Department of Justice website. It outlines the specific ADA regulations regarding miniature horses as service animals. You might want to pay particular attention to the sections covering public access rights and non-discrimination against handlers." Karen eyed the paper as if it were coated in anthrax, refusing to take it. "I don't need your propaganda, Michael. Jack, the HOA rules are established. They supersede any federal nonsense." "Actually, Karen, they don't," I corrected gently. "In matters of disability rights and accommodation, federal law like the ADA takes precedence over local ordinances or HOA rules. It's called federal preemption. Basic civics." I held out the second sheet. "And this one details the relevant state statutes and local ordinances regarding leash laws, owner liability, and the specific penalties for owners whose dogs attack or interfere with legitimate service animals. Might be relevant, considering Killer's recent behavior and the police report that was filed." I saw a flicker of something. Confusion? Annoyance? Cross her face. I decided to add a touch of K9 handler firmness, the same calm, confident tone I used when setting boundaries with a challenging dog. "Ignoring these official regulations, Karen," I continued, my voice steady, "especially after being formally warned by the police about Killer's aggression and the leash law violation, could unfortunately move this situation beyond simple HOA fines and into the realm of actual legal liability. For you, personally. I'm just sharing this as friendly, neighborly information, of course, so you're fully informed of the real rules." I didn't wait for a response. I simply placed the folded printouts neatly on top of her pristine, HOA-approved mailbox. Patches let out a soft snort beside me, perfectly timed, as if adding an equine exclamation point to my statement. Then we continued our walk, leaving Karen standing there, staring at the papers on her mailbox as if they might explode. Sometimes the best defense isn't just documenting, It's educating, arming your opponent with the very facts that undermine their position. Let her chew on the Department of Justice website and the state penal code for a while. Maybe it would give Killer a break from being yelled at ineffectively. A few days later, the official white truck of County Animal Control pulled up in front of my house. I wasn't surprised. I'd half expected Karen to escalate to involving other agencies, hoping one of them would validate her pony illegal livestock crusade. Sure enough, as ACO Miller, a sturdy woman with a no-nonsense demeanor and practical mud-resistant boots, stepped out of the truck, Karen materialized on her porch across the street, arms crossed, watching with an air of smug vindication. "Jack Riley?" ACO Miller asked, consulting her clipboard as she walked up my driveway. "That's me," I confirmed, meeting her halfway. "Let me guess. Complained about an unlicensed equine potential nuisance, bad odors, maybe excessive whinnying?" ACO Miller gave a wry half-smile. "Something like that. Standard anonymous neighbor complaint." She glanced across the street at Karen, who quickly pretended to be examining a wind chime. "Came from that direction, I take it?" "You'd win that bet," I said. "Officer Miller, this is Patches." I gestured towards the backyard, where Patches was peacefully observing us from his newly completed, very secure turnout area. "He's my ADA-recognized service animal. All his vaccinations are up to date, he's microchipped, and he's licensed with the county exactly as required for a service animal, not as livestock. I have all his documentation right here, including his vet records and the relevant ADA paperwork outlining his status." I handed her a neatly organized folder I'd prepared precisely for this eventuality. Karen started to call something out from her porch. "He's a horse, officer. Ask about the zoning." But ACO Miller held up a hand without looking at her. "Let me review the paperwork and observe the animal first, ma'am," she called back firmly. She spent a good 10 minutes meticulously reviewing every document in the folder. She walked around the perimeter of the new fence, checking its height and stability. She observed Patches, noting his calm demeanor and healthy appearance. She sniffed the air. "Well," she said finally, closing the folder. "Paperwork all seems to be in order regarding his service animal status under the ADA. Vaccinations are current. County service animal tag is valid." She looked towards Patches again. "Enclosure looks clean, secure, adequate space, fresh water, good quality hay. I'm not detecting any offensive odors beyond faintly horse-like, which is to be expected." She turned back to me. "Honestly, he looks healthier and better cared for than half the dogs I see." She then raised her voice slightly, addressing Karen across the street. "Ma'am, based on my inspection and review of the documentation, this miniature horse qualifies as a service animal under state and federal guidelines. He is therefore exempt from standard livestock ordinances. Furthermore, I find no evidence to support the nuisance complaints regarding noise or odor. This complaint is officially closed as unfounded." She handed the folder back to me. "Have a good day, Mr. Riley. Nice-looking miniature. Very calm." With another nod, she got back in her truck and drove away. Karen stood on her porch, momentarily speechless, her face a mask of thwarted fury. I gave her a polite, neutral nod before turning back towards my house. Near the fence line, Leo and Rick, who had apparently stopped by to pick up a forgotten tool, gave me a silent, emphatic thumbs up. Another round to Team Pony. Facts, documentation, and professionals doing their jobs were proving surprisingly effective against Karen's feelings-based enforcement tactics. But I caught the look in her eye before she stormed back inside. The property values argument she'd tried on ACO Miller, that was her nuclear option. This wasn't over. She'd just take the fight to a different venue, the HOA meeting. The next HOA meeting felt different, more charged. The usual handful of board attendees was augmented by a dozen or so more homeowners, drawn in by the burgeoning pony controversy. Karen had clearly been busy, spreading her gospel of impending property value doom and livestock infiltration. She stood at the front of the sterile community room, armed with a laser pointer and a new PowerPoint presentation. Title: Protecting Our Investment, Addressing Non-Conforming Animals and Their Impact on Community Standards and Property Values. She launched into her spiel, voice quivering with manufactured concern. She showed blurry charts, allegedly depicting dips in local home sale prices since Patch's arrival, ignoring the broader market trends, naturally. She spoke darkly of precedent, the erosion of aesthetic harmony, and the slippery slope from miniature horses to, apparently, roving herds of wildebeest thundering through our cul-de-sacs. She never mentioned me or Patches by name, only referring ominously to certain properties harboring inappropriate animals that threatened the very fabric of Sunny Meadows Estates. When she finally finished, I had requested time to speak. I walked to the front, keeping my demeanor calm and professional. I didn't bring charts about property values. I brought facts about the law and about Patches. "Good evening," I began, addressing the room. "My name is Jack Riley, and I live at 124 Willow Lane. The non-conforming animal being discussed tonight is Patches, my highly trained miniature service horse." I clicked to my first slide, a clear photo of Patches in his vest. Patches is not livestock. He is a medical aid, recognized and protected under the Federal Americans with Disabilities Act. I clicked again, showing the relevant text from the ADA website. Just like a guide dog for the visually impaired or a hearing dog for the deaf, Patches performs specific tasks that mitigate my disability. In my case, providing balance and stability support due to a neurological condition. I showed a short, tasteful video clip of Patches calmly bracing as I stood up from a chair, and another of him walking steadily beside me. Miniature horses are a recognized alternative for people who, for reasons like allergies or specific physical needs, cannot use a service dog. They are intelligent, calm, and have a long lifespan. I then addressed the recent incidents directly, but factually. Unfortunately, Patches was recently attacked by an off-leash pet in our neighborhood. Murmurs rippled through the room. Clearly, the sidewalk incident was known. The police were called, a report was filed, and the owner was warned. Subsequently, animal control was called with unfounded nuisance complaints. They investigated thoroughly and found no violations, confirming Patch's legal status and dismissing the complaints. I held up copies of the police report summary and the ACO's findings. The only nuisance related to Patches, I concluded, meeting Karen's glare directly, has been the harassment directed towards us and the danger posed by an uncontrolled neighborhood pet. Patches has a legal right to be here, and I have a right to the quiet enjoyment of my property without fear of attacks or baseless accusations driven by prejudice against a service animal that looks different. I yielded the floor. Karen looked like she wanted to spontaneously combust, but something had shifted in the room. An older woman spoke up. "My own grandson uses a service dog for his autism," she said warmly. "They're wonderful, helpful animals. Makes no difference if it's a dog or a little horse, if it helps someone." Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. "Have to say," he piped up, "the little horse seems very quiet to me. Hardly know he's there. Certainly quieter than that yapping terrier across the street from him." Karen shot him a look that could freeze lava. No vote was taken that night. The board, mostly Karen's allies, looked distinctly uncomfortable, but the narrative wasn't solely Karen's anymore. Seeds of doubt, reason, and empathy had been planted. Maybe, just maybe, sanity had a fighting chance in Sunny Meadows Estates. The war wasn't won, but the tide felt like it was beginning to turn. Self-correction. The story is flowing well and hitting the plot points, but I need to ensure I'm building towards the 5,000-word target naturally. I'll slightly expand the descriptions and internal monologue in the final act. Karen, predictably, didn't take her public setback well. The direct confrontations and bureaucratic attacks hadn't worked, so she shifted to a campaign of passive aggression and attempted public shaming. Suddenly, anonymous flyers appeared on community bulletin boards warning about the dangers of large animals in residential areas and vaguely referencing potential insurance liabilities. Subtle. I realized I needed to do more than just react. I needed to proactively demystify Patches and normalize his presence. The upcoming HOA Community Fun Day, likely Karen's brainchild to foster togetherness while subtly reinforcing her authority, seemed like the perfect opportunity. After navigating a surprising amount of red tape, Karen clearly tried to block me. I secured permission from a saner committee member to host a brief Meet a Service Animal demonstration. Saturday morning dawned bright and sunny. The community park buzzed with forced cheerfulness. There were lukewarm hot dogs, a slightly sad bouncy house, and Karen patrolling the perimeter like a hawk, guarding a Tupperware container of potato salad. I set up in a small, roped-off grassy area, strategically located near the lemonade stand, but far from Karen's HOA information booth. First, I brought out Patches. He stood calmly, wearing his vest, occasionally flicking his ears at the nearby sounds, but otherwise unfazed. I explained his role, demonstrated a few simple tasks, bracing for me, picking up my dropped keys with his teeth, always a crowd pleaser, walking calmly through a simulated crowd. Leo and Rick, bribed with free lemonade, obligingly shuffled around. I emphasized his training, his calm temperament, and the specific reasons why a miniature horse was the right service animal for my needs. Severe allergies to dog dander, plus the need for rock-solid stability that even a large dog couldn't consistently provide. Then, for Phase 2, I brought out Rex. Rex was one of my current K9 prospects, a magnificent 2-year-old German Shepherd brimming with controlled energy and intelligence. He wore a simple Police K9 in training vest. The mere sight of him, alert, powerful, focused entirely on me, caused a ripple of interest. "This is Rex," I explained to the growing crowd of curious neighbors. "He's training for patrol work. Like Patches, he's a working animal who requires extensive training and responsible handling." I put Rex through his paces, crisp obedience commands. Sit, stay, down, heel, a focused retrieve of a training toy. His movements were precise, his attention unwavering. "The key," I explained, "with any working animal, whether it's a service horse like Patches or a police K9 like Rex, is control, communication, and trust. It's about responsible ownership and ensuring the animal is safe, reliable, and never a nuisance or a danger to the community." I paused, letting my gaze sweep briefly towards Karen, who was watching from a distance, her arms crossed tightly, her face thunderous. Unlike untrained pets that are allowed to run loose and potentially cause harm or distress. The demonstration was a quiet success. People asked thoughtful questions. Several kids, after asking permission, gently petted Patch's nose or Rex's broad head. Rex endured the attention with stoic tolerance. Neighbors saw Patches not just as a pony, but as a calm, focused partner. They saw Rex, a potentially intimidating animal, under absolute, quiet control. The contrast between this and the memory of Killer's frantic, uncontrolled attack was palpable. Mr. Henderson gave me an enthusiastic thumbs up. Even Barb and Carol, standing near Karen, looked less severe, perhaps even intrigued. Show, don't just tell. Let them see the reality, not just Karen's fear-mongering. Sometimes the best way to fight absurdity is with calm, professional competence. And a really well-behaved German Shepherd definitely doesn't hurt. As I was packing up my small setup, thanking Leo and Rick for their crowd work, Karen finally approached, flanked by her ever-present acolytes, Barb and Carol. Her face was tight with barely suppressed fury. "This was highly inappropriate, Jack," she hissed, keeping her voice low but venomous. "Using a community event to flaunt your HOA violations and bringing that attack dog." She gestured towards Rex, who was now lying calmly at my feet, watching Karen with intelligent, unblinking eyes. "Karen," I replied, my voice equally quiet but firm. "I received permission from the event committee, and Rex is not an attack dog. He's a highly trained police K-9 prospect undergoing rigorous socialization and control work. Unlike some other animals in this neighborhood," I added pointedly, "he is under complete verbal and physical control at all times. This wasn't about flaunting anything. It was about education. Helping people understand different types of working animals." "Education?" she scoffed. "It looked like intimidation. You brought that beast here to try and scare people into accepting your pony." I looked her straight in the eye, channeling years of experience dealing with challenging subjects, both human and canine. "Karen," I said slowly, deliberately, "in my line of work, we deal with aggression, fear, and non-compliance every single day. We learn to use clear commands, consistent boundaries, and calm de-escalation techniques. We reward positive behavior. We correct negative behavior firmly, fairly, and immediately. We establish who's in charge, not through yelling or panic or arbitrary rules, but through quiet confidence, consistency, and unwavering control." I let my gaze drift meaningfully from Rex, sitting patiently, to Patches, standing calmly, then back to her. "It works for dogs, Karen. Sometimes," I added softly, "it even works for people who refuse to follow the real rules." The implication hung heavy in the air. I wasn't just talking about dogs anymore. Karen stared at me, her mouth slightly open. For the first time, she seemed to actually hear the underlying message. She looked flustered, glancing quickly at Barb and Carol, who suddenly found the grass at their feet utterly fascinating. She opened her mouth as if to retort, probably to quote some obscure bylaw about public demonstrations or intimidating fauna, but then she closed it again. For perhaps the first time since I'd moved in, Karen Smith, HOA president and bylaw tyrant, had no comeback. She turned abruptly, almost stumbling over her own feet, and stalked away, Barb and Carol trailing uncertainly in her wake, like pilot fish abandoning a confused shark. Leo, who had lingered nearby pretending to admire a shrub, nudged Rick. "Did he just K-9 command the HOA president?" he whispered, awestruck. Rick nodded slowly, a wide grin finally breaking across his usually deadpan face. "Think he did. Told you he was smooth." Maybe it wasn't total victory, but it felt like a significant turning point. Hitting her with facts hadn't worked. Hitting her with laws had only partially worked. But framing her own behavior in terms she might vaguely, instinctively understand. Like a badly behaved, poorly socialized dog needing firm, consistent handling from a confident leader, that seemed to penetrate the bubble of righteous indignation. Or maybe, just maybe, she was finally a little bit scared of Rex. Either way, I'd take it. Weeks melted into a month. A strange, almost unnerving quiet settled over my stretch of Willow Lane. I walked Patches every morning and evening without incident. He enjoyed his secure turnout area, sometimes kicking up his heels in a brief, joyful buck when the mood struck him. The reinforced fence, expertly installed by Leo and Rick, stood strong and unobtrusive. Karen sightings became less frequent. When I did see her, usually wrestling with her recycling bin or power walking with grim determination, she pointedly avoided eye contact. Killer was now perpetually attached to a short, sturdy leash, often held so tightly he seemed to be walking on his tiptoes. The barrage of official HOA violation notices ceased entirely. A subtle thaw occurred with some of the other neighbors. Mr. Henderson now waved cheerily every time he saw us, occasionally offering Patches a slice of apple over the fence, with my permission. A few other residents stopped me on walks, asking friendly questions about Patches's training or my K-9 work. It seemed the meet a service animal demonstration, combined with Karen's noticeable retreat, had shifted public opinion from suspicion or indifference to curiosity and acceptance. Patches, with his calm demeanor and undeniable cuteness factor, was his own best ambassador. Leo and Rick stopped by one last time to collect their final payment and perform a ceremonial final inspection of their handiwork. "So," Leo asked, leaning against the sturdy new gate, "peace in our time, or just a temporary ceasefire in the great pony wars?" I chuckled, handing him the check. "Let's call it an uneasy truce. Karen hasn't tried to measure Patch's tail length for regulatory compliance or cite him for excessive blinking lately, so I'm counting that as progress." Rick grinned. "Just keep that German Shepherd handy, Jack. You know, for educational purposes." "Rex sends his regards," I laughed. "Thanks again for the great work, guys, and for the ringside commentary during the main event." Leo clapped me on the shoulder. "Any time, Jack. Beats watching paint dry. Though your neighborhood's got enough drama for a TV show." They waved goodbye and drove off, leaving behind a solid fence and the lingering echo of their dry humor. Later that evening, I sat on the bench inside Patch's turnout area, simply enjoying the quiet. The late afternoon sun slanted through the leaves, dappling the grass in gold. Patches ambled over, resting his head gently on my lap, his signature move when he was feeling relaxed and content. He let out a soft, breathy sigh. I stroked his coarse, warm mane, feeling the familiar tension in my own shoulders begin to ease. It had been absurd, the whole ordeal. The attack, the German commands, the bewildered cops, the deadpan contractors, the blizzard of bylaws, the kangaroo court meetings, the public demonstration with a police dog, all because one woman couldn't handle someone, slightly different in her rigidly controlled little world. All this effort, just to ensure this calm, steady, 250-pound equine partner could continue doing his job, helping me navigate the world without falling on my face. Patches handled it all with more grace and dignity than most humans I knew. Miniature horse, K-9 trainer. Maybe not such a weird combination after all. Both loyal, both requiring patience and clear communication, both trained to navigate unpredictable environments and challenging situations, both dealing in their own ways with difficult subjects. Across the street, Karen's living room curtains twitched. Just for a second. Then they were still. The war might be over, the truce might be holding, but surveillance apparently was eternal. I smiled, scratching Patches behind his fuzzy ears. He nudged my hand, asking for more. So yeah. HOA Karen unleashed her yapping terror on my service pony. She just didn't know she was picking a fight with someone who handles tougher characters than Killer for a living, using principles that apply surprisingly well across species lines. It took police reports, ADA printouts, animal control visits, public demonstrations, and maybe just a little bit of applied behavioral psychology via K-9 metaphor, but we found a path through the suburban battlefield. Patches is safe. The neighborhood is quiet. Well, quieter. And Karen? Well, Karen is undoubtedly still Karen, probably polishing her laminated rule book somewhere. But at least now her dog stays on a leash. And maybe, just maybe, She thinks twice before quoting bylaws about livestock at a guy who trains police dogs. You gotta take your victories where you can get 'em, right? Especially when your partner in navigating the chaos is a four-legged, hay-powered, utterly unflappable miniature horse.